Dreena Burton, welcome back to the Plant Yourself podcast.
So happy to see you again. Thanks, Howie.
Yeah, as you said, it's been a bunch of years, 5 or 6 since you were on. You been up to anything since then?
Yeah, nothing. Just another few books.
Yeah.
Yeah, no more kids, just books.
So I'm trying to remember. I think we talk about the family's cookbook last.
I believe that is the last time I spoke with you. And then I did 2 books in collaboration with Dr. Barnard in between that book and this new book. But I think that was when we chatted. Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned in the introduction to your new book, which is Dreena's Kind Kitchen, that the family's book, let me see what it says exactly. I got it. Plant Powered Families was the first cookbook with oil-free.
Right.
So I found myself because I've been a fan of yours from way back when you were one of the only vegan cookbook authors. Like your book started colonizing my shelf and moving like Moosewood and Laurel's Kitchen and sort of my, the Tastahara bread book, there's vegan stuff. And your books have evolved, and I guess you have evolved over the past, was it 20, 25 years you've been doing this now?
Yeah. Writing cookbooks for over 20 years. Yeah, it definitely evolved. Yeah.
Yeah. So take us through, what's the arc been like?
Yeah, so interesting, right, that you mentioned this, because when my first book, The Everyday Vegan, that came out in 2001, that was a very healthy book back in the day, right? Considering we didn't know much about plant-based at the time. It was fairly new, but I wrote that book with the intention of offering recipes partly to my parents-in-law, because my husband's father had had a heart attack a couple of years before that. And his doctor recommended Dr. Dean Ornish's program for reversing heart disease, which was largely unheard of. We are from Newfoundland and we were in a small town. And so not only was it, over 20 years ago and not much was known about plant-based, we were also in a very remote, small area that, they would have caught on to the whole notion a little bit later than, in larger centers. So it was rather a radical idea at the time. And his parents came to us. We had already been eating vegan for a few years then and said, how do we do this? So I'd always enjoyed scratching down recipes and kind of muddling my own way through the kitchen, and thought, okay, this is the time to put pen to paper and create some recipes. So that book was actually fairly healthy, and the oil that was in it was quite minimal because I knew they needed a very low fat diet and almost no fat, really, right? Like low to no fat for disease reversal. It's very, very low. And so I'd make muffins with, say, like a tablespoon of oil or something like that. So that was a fairly healthy cookbook. And when vegans started to grow at that time, it was still very, very early. There was much more focus on trying to create everything to be as indulgent as possible, right? And to mimic everything that was out there, that we wanted to show that, hey, we can have this and it's still vegan. And let's show them how to make the most delicious desserts and, really luxurious food. And so my work, I think, was really sort of in the shadows at the time, because it wasn't in that framework of being just a little bit richer and indulgent. And then my next book, Vive la Vegan, came out after our first daughter was born. I then worked on the second book, which I felt like I was growing in my own repertoire of ingredients in terms of how many different grains I was using and learning about new beans and just kind of digestibility of foods. And so in addition to the recipes in that, I included information about introducing food to babies and toddlers on a vegan diet. And it was a very non-allergenic or low allergenic kind of basis. And so that was that book. And then my third book came out, Eat, Drink, and Be
Okay.
Vegan. I think
Yeah.
you
Can I
knew
ask you
that
about,
book. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. But your second book, like at that point, were you now thinking of yourself like a professional cookbook
No.
author?
Not really. No, I still very much was, in my mom mode, right? Like that was first and foremost in my mind, mom mode. And really, I was making very little money with my books, and social media was not on the scene. Blogging wasn't even blogging. I
Hmm.
remember I started my first blog, which was Blogspot. I don't know if you remember that kind of
I
framework for
do.
blogging.
I do.
Okay. And so I remember starting a blog on Blogspot in 2005, and that was just after Viva Vegan came out. So I was, I guess, considered a professional cookbook author, but in my world, I was just kind of, doing a hobby thing, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And I almost stopped after Eat, Drink, and Be Vegan. I almost stopped. I'm grateful I didn't. But it was a lot of work. And I was really like, it was not um, I didn't feel like I was connecting with people either, because again, it was not on social media, and there weren't a lot of
Mhm.
opportunities to meet and greet people and get out in the world. Festivals were like once a year, right? A veg festival. And in terms of income, I was really not making very much, like I said. So, but I continued on with then Let Them Eat Vegan, or Eat, Drink, and Be Vegan was kind of like a little more celebratory. It included like some more party fare and a little more different cuisines, and a whole chapter on hummus, which people really loved. And then Let Them Eat Vegan. I love the recipes in that book, but that book doesn't really showcase how beautiful those recipes are. It wasn't produced the best, the publisher I had at the time, but lots of depth of flavor and different cuisines again, and really kind of exciting dishes in that book, and a lot of gluten-free options for people. And then I moved into oil-free cooking with plant-powered families. And I did a couple of ebooks as well. And then 2 books with Dr. Bernard, The Cheese Trap and the Diabetes Reversal Cookbook. But my own solo project, that was my first oil-free book, was Plant-Powered Families. So I kind of, like you, grew with it, learned from some of the experts in the field, the doctors, the leaders, and realized that, oil, because for a very long time we were told it was not just okay, but very, very necessary, right? To cook with oil or add it to our foods. I used to use it in my kids' food a lot, and they always had oil stained shirts, right?
Yeah.
Because when you get oil on clothes, it's very hard to get it out. And then, just kind of, I kind of went back to my roots, I guess I'd say, with plant-powered families and very wholesome foods. But along the way, like with 3 kids and wanting to just make cooking very accessible, not just for me, but everyone. I really learned how to streamline things and cut out certain steps, make the processes a little bit easier, and really deliver recipes for people that could be done, as efficiently as possible, right? Either using the food processor, getting everything in that, or doing everything in a casserole dish, kind of like cutting out steps for people. And I continue in that theme with Dreena's Kind Kitchen.
Mm. So when did you like turn pro in your mind?
Probably with Plant Powered Families, truly.
So it's like 2015. So like
Yeah.
15 years after you started, you're
Yeah.
like, okay, this is a thing.
Yeah. I caught on. Well, I moved publishers with Plant Powered Families. And the first my first 3 books, I was with a Canadian publisher, and I liked working with them. But I felt like it was time to kind of explore my options. And I had heard some good things about this other publisher that I moved to with Let Them Eat Vegan. I did not have a great experience, and then went with Ben Bella for Plant Powered Families. They also did the China study, and have absolutely had the greatest experience with them. And, it's more about for authors, it's a whole lot more than your royalties. I mean, yes, that's important. You need to earn a good living for what you're doing. But books don't really sustain people in terms of income anyhow, right? Unless you have a really, really huge selling books, they're kind of a limb of your work, right? You do other things to earn revenue around the book. So for authors, it's really important that you open that book and just really love how it came together. And with Plant Power Families, that's how I felt. I just like, oh, they did a beautiful job. Everything's photographed. It's aesthetically pleasing, and it connected with people, and that was important to me. So that's, I think, when it felt different.
Mm.
Yeah.
So when you started writing, it sounds like you were kind of writing in a vacuum. Like
Yes.
you were putting this stuff out there and there was no social media. You weren't clear how much was selling, like what the impact was. What was the impact of social media on the evolution of your work?
Such a good point. Yes, I feel like it was that connection with people. And I mean, social media has all its pros and cons, right? But the huge pro is knowing that you are connecting and helping people on their journeys. And like, I'd hear from people, and some days I might have a bad day and put a post up and wow, have this outpouring of support. And I thought, wow, like this is significant. So as much as we can be too pulled into social media at times and be distracted by it, it certainly has allowed us to bring support to one another when we're in these areas of life that are not the norm, right? And we're working in lifestyles or trying to change our habits and things like that. That support's really important.
Yeah, it seems like it allowed this subculture among many others to flourish, to allow all the weirdos to find each other,
Yes.
And it seems like, in the 90s and earlier, if you wrote a cookbook, you were hoping it was going to get picked up. New York Times, Bon Appetit was going to do a spread on you. Like there was there was a lot of gates and filters to have an important cookbook. And now all of a sudden you have an important cookbook, but it's only important to 1% of the population. And no major news outlet would take the space to cover that. Mm-hmm. And so now all of a sudden you have a niche. I'm curious, what were the kinds of feedback and messages that you got as you entered, I guess it was like, Facebook and the blogosphere at first, that told you that your work was important in the world?
Messages that I still get to this day where people say, your book was the first book that I turned to, that I found when I began this journey, and I keep coming back to your book, or something like that. Or I have so many bookmark pages, or my pages are falling out of that book. I use the recipes every week. Like that kind of thing is so meaningful when you're part of that person's, daily journey to eat healthier and eat more compassionately. And when I hear those things, I get them by email, or someone sends me the photos of the recipes they've made. Like it just warms my heart entirely. It's the best feeling. I love it so much. And you're right. Like years ago, it was all about getting some media attention, and it's not that way anymore. You can get TV spots, but it's not. Social media is where everything really circulates and bubbles up, and people talk. I mean, a few good media hits are good too, but
right. We don't turn them down.
No, indeed.
So I think I met you in the fall of 2013 at the Vida Vegan Con Festival in Portland, Oregon. And I didn't realize there were things like that until then. But, there was you, I think I met Miyoko and a whole bunch of other, like sort of icons, like people who had, I just wanted you to like sign my books and stuff. And I'm curious, like, at what point did you start meeting other cookbook authors, other sort of, culinary luminaries of the plant-based and vegan movement?
I would say that was one of my first as well. That was a big one for me. And wow, Miyoko's done so much since then, right? Like it's amazing when you think about what's happened in the last 10 years or so. I think it's been at that festival. And then I went to Summerfest, which is quite a haul for me to go to. It was quite a trip to get there. And that's where I met a lot of big names in the industry as well. I met Dr. Barnard at Whole Foods here in Vancouver once. He was doing a talk, and I said to my family, I want to go meet him, because he had offered a forward for Eat, Drink, and Be Vegan. And I was like, we got to get out there. And I met him for the first time there. But Vita Vegan Con and Summerfest, and then actually those were the biggest. It's been the US festivals that had the biggest names. Although I'm hoping, I think I'm doing one here in November, and there's going to be some, big Rich Roll will be there. So hopefully we'll get to meet him. Yeah.
So how does, I'm curious, like when you started writing, you were really not in a conversation with anyone. You were just like, I've gotten, but now, like, and when you started writing cookbooks, there were almost no vegan cookbooks. Like whatever you did was going to add to the genre. But now, of course, we have this incredible explosion. I'm wondering, do you think, I'm friends with Kathy Hester, who lives, not too far from me. And she's like, thinking like, what's the next cookbook? Like, you don't want to do a cookbook that someone else has done. And there's so much out there. How do you think about, like, so your latest one, The Kind Kitchen, it's pretty eclectic. It's not like, it has a particular focus. So how do you decide, like, this is what I have to add to the conversation right now?
Well, with Plant Powered Families, I really felt like with that book in particular, it was time. There was nothing on the market for families. There was nothing to talk about, like raising children and picky eaters and school parties and those sort of complexities of having little children that feel very overwhelming in the moment, right, when they're little. And so that one, I really felt like this huge urge, like there was something inside me saying this book needs to be on the market. And with Kind Kitchen, I really just felt like I wanted to share more of my recipes and felt like I had this, community that were asking for more of my recipes. And with this book, I wanted to show how to make it even simpler and to really meet people where they are, because my perspective and my approach in the community has always been, a place of compassion and not judgment and not shame, rather just kind of, here we are, try to welcome you into my space or into this space of eating and show you that it's very doable and you can take it in steps. So that's kind of where I've always been in my space in like, for instance, my Facebook page, my group. I have a Plant Powered Families group. It's always from that perspective of, hey, welcome. Let's show you a few things. And so with Dreena's Kind Kitchen, that's what I wanted to kind of the tone I wanted to bring to the book. And to show people that not only could you make these recipes and they're delicious and wholesome and they're oil-free, but hey, I can also offer you nut-free options for like a cheesecake or a queso and still oil-free and nut-free. And hey, I'm going to use ingredients in a real fun way so that they add texture and color. We're not hiding the veggies, but we're working them in interesting ways. So that's for me. I just felt like I had a whole new collection of recipes that I wanted to deliver, really.
So without necessarily, it sounds like you weren't necessarily like sniffing out the market and seeing like what's the trend or what's the need. It was just sort of like, I'm gonna like writing a novel, like I'm gonna express myself here, and if that's what people want, then I'm gonna be authentic in it.
That's yes. I've never been that strategic. Perhaps I should have been, but it's never been, because I develop recipes very organically. Like I'm in the kitchen, I'm like, I have this idea, I want to work on it, and then it becomes a recipe, and then I build on that. And so usually I'm building a collection of different types of recipes rather than saying, I want to do this book and I'm going to focus on what needs to be done for that book. I do have a couple of ideas in mind for like a possible book in the future, but we'll see. It's just ideas that are bubbling.
One of the things that occurs to me is like when you talked about like coming out with these recipes that are sort of, kind and non-judgmental and welcoming of anyone in the community, like the front lines of veganism have really shifted from, like where would people see vegans? They would see them like protesting. And now the vegans they see are offering them delicious food. It seems like a smarter strategy.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, I've always said if the food is served and it's delicious and satisfying, no one's ever going to say what's not in it, right? They're not asking what's not in it. It's just delicious food. And I agree, there's been a very big shift in perception, and it was due, we weren't all living that way. I mean, I remember when my first book came out, and we were doing I was doing a cooking segment, and we were flown to Toronto at the time. That was a big deal, right? Now everything's Zoom. It's great. I did some cooking segments, one in LA, one in Chicago, and it was all from my kitchen. It was fabulous. But the cab driver was talking to us, and he was saying he was vegetarian. I was like, oh, cool. I said, we're actually vegan. Do you know what that is? And he's like, oh yeah, that's very radical.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sitting in the back seat with my husband and our 6-month-old baby, looking just as every day as everybody else, which is partly why we called the book the Everyday Vegan, because I felt I was fairly every day. But that was the perception for sure, and it's shifted. Now it's like you wouldn't know who's vegan. Everyone, all walks of life.
So given all the cookbooks out there and all the cookbook authors and all the connections, are there do you have other cookbooks? Do you cook from them? Do you use them for inspiration? Or are you I don't want to mess my mind up?
The latter. Yeah. I'm always impressed by other people's work, and I love to look at it for a beautiful work of art, right? Wow, look at this, what they've done. But I don't delve into recipes too much, or even want to get my mind around them, because it's so hard to craft out your own piece of work and know that it's yours. You know what I mean? I mean, there's thousands of chocolate chip cookie recipes, right?
Right.
So there's always variations on recipes, and that's part of the work, but you try to stay true to your own craft. So yeah.
So another thing that's changed a lot since 2001 is the availability of ingredients and sort of savviness of what stuff is. I'm sure I didn't look today before this conversation, but I'm sure you had to explain what soy milk was, or quinoa and where you can get it. And so on the one hand, we have this proliferation of healthy options, kinds of produce, sophistication, Whole Foods is now a thing, and people have Wegmans and online shopping. And on the other hand, we have all the vegan processed food that almost makes vegan, it almost makes it redundant. You could just eat like everybody else, and it's getting harder and harder to even tell the difference. How have you navigated that?
Yeah, I have to say, it's been tricky the last few years, because it's been kind of fun, right? To go out and see all the new foods. And I'm a food person, so I like to try things. I want to try things, and I want to be able to say, oh, that's a good product, and I want my kids to have some of that fun food too. It's like you say, it's like a double-edged sword, really. I don't have to explain what tahini is to anybody anymore. That's wonderful. Rarely I do. My mom still says vegan, and it's hilarious to me that she still says you're vegan. But it's for my kids, because they're older now, right? 20, 16, and 12. So when my 16-year-old goes out with her friends and they go out for something to eat, I'm very grateful that she can get something when she's out like that. Usually a restaurant has the Beyond Burger on the menu. Most places do now. Or she can, even go to A&W, for instance, and get something. She doesn't often, and it's not her favorite thing to eat, but I feel very grateful that we have that option. But at the same time, I can we have a vegan store here. It's called Vegan Supply. And I can spend $100 on not very much, having, let's try this and let's try this. So, it's nice to have the options, but really you have to stay fairly rooted in the foundation of the whole foods and have those things as, occasions, treats. It's easy to get carried away with it, for sure.
Because the last two cookbooks I've talked about on the podcast is yours, which is, and as I'm flipping through the ingredients, it's beans, brown rice, bay leaves, tomato paste, and maple syrup are the most processed things you have. And the other one that was Nava Atlas, plant-powered protein, which is here's how you take all these, amazing new fake meats and and cook around them and make them healthy. And it's
Oh.
interesting that, you know,
Mhm.
that the different approach, like you're keeping them out of your
Yeah.
your work.
Yeah, and primarily because it's not what we eat day to day. I mean, we will order the occasional vegan pizza. I will cook Guardian Mandarin chicken for my youngest sometimes. She loves it. But day to day, we eat the beans and grains. And my husband despises anything that's too meat-like. It really, really turns him off. He doesn't like to order out, and if he's out at a work function or something and they go to a restaurant, he doesn't want to order that Beyond Burger because it's too meat like for him. So I don't buy them, and there are a few things I buy that the kids like, but I don't use them in my daily cooking. So yeah, it's just not part of how I cook. So I just always come back to the beans and grains, and I just think you can make some really cool things with them too, right? It's really fun to take nuts and seeds and grains and beans and turn them into a really delicious burger, and it's way tastier than something that you buy. Yeah.
So today, in preparation for our call, I felt like I had to cook. So
that's a lot of pressure.
So yeah, it was tough. It was hard, but I do it for my listeners. So I made the I don't know how to pronounce it, Aush soup.
The Aush soup.
Aush soup, which I've got to say, it's you have a beautiful picture of it, and my picture the soup looked as good when I made it as your picture. Which is like,
nice. That's good.
That's always nice. It's not all like bounce lighting and.
No, my photographer was true to I said, I want it to look like how people will make it, and photography is tricky because they do have to get things at the right temperature. Like basil turns off color very quickly, but for the most part, yeah.
And then we also made the nummy brownie bites. So because we had to get something from the dessert.
The desserts. I'm with you.
Yeah, I have to say it reminded me a lot of schmoopy cookies.
Okay, you are a fan of the schmoopy cookies. Good.
Yeah, well, I try to go light because they don't meet all of my life goals.
I hear you. Yes, I know. Whenever I make cookies, my husband says, "But they're healthy, aren't they?" I'm like, that doesn't, I said, well, healthy is like a very broad term you're using to describe those cookies. I was like, have one or two, not half the batch, right?
Well, that's the problem. When you get a cookbook like this, it's got the halo effect on it.
Yeah.
It's like, it's got Colin Campbell's name on the cover.
Right.
I know of your work. It's plant-based, whole food. And I'm like, well, I could eat as much as I want of all of this stuff.
Yeah. It's really great when we can remind ourselves, but it's healthy. Yeah, there might be pumpkin seeds and things in there, but it's still, pretty high calorie if you eat half a batch of cookies.
Yep. So I mentioned the Aush soup because I've never eaten anything from an Afghan cuisine before. It was unusual with sort of the savory lemon and the sumac. I liked it right away. My wife's like, nice. I'm not sure about this, but you have a bunch of sort of internationally inspired cuisine. How do you go about collecting that? Do you like watch cooking shows or go to restaurants or like Afghan, Thai, Moroccan, like you're all over the place. Like where do those inspirations come from?
Some of it has been eating at restaurants over the years, but I will say not too much from restaurants because we don't dine out a lot. That soup was inspired by a restaurant here called Afghan Kitchen, and we order in from their restaurant sometime. It's just really, really oily is the only thing. I mean, the flavors are amazing, but everything is very, very oily, especially when you haven't been having oil in your food. You really notice it then when people cook with it. And that soup in particular was as well. But a lot of times, I used to watch a lot of cooking shows years ago when I first started to kind of explore cuisines and, what flavors are going together, like what spice combinations work for, Indian food or when you're making, like you say, something that's a Thai dish, like what flavor elements do you want to go in there? And a lot of times I still do a little bit of digging. Like if I want to do a Moroccan recipe, I'll just Google like Moroccan spices and get an idea of sort of the flavors, or because sometimes I might feel I'm missing something and I'll do a little search. I'm like, oh, I'm going to try this in the dish. So I'll do that kind of thing. But I used to love the cooking shows from years ago that were real cooking shows. Now it's all, competitions. I used to love the cooking shows years ago from, Food Network Canada and in the US, and they were very instructional and used to teach a lot about ingredients themselves. And I found that very helpful.
So who eats all your mistakes?
Oh, the family. I've learned that if I put guacamole on anything, they'll eat it. That always works. If it's really bad, it doesn't get to the table. Like if it's really bad, I'm like, oh God, if it's not fixable, if there's something I could do with it, right? If there's a way I can fix it, I will. And then I'll just chalk it up to, okay, that recipe didn't work, or I really need to restructure it. But over time, you get a little better at not messing up too much. I'll say that.
So what's your process for vetting a recipe for a cookbook? So I guess it starts with you tasting it, then your family, but does it go through other layers? Do you have, fans and editors and other bloggers?
Yeah, great question. I do have a group of recipe testers that I've worked with, and they tend to fluctuate a little bit. I get some coming in and some move on with things, but for the last few books, I've had an amazing group of people help out with recipe testing. And so I always work through the recipe myself, make sure it's tested several times. And then once they're done, and I feel like they're the way I would blog them, for instance, fairly complete in instructions and ingredients and accurate, then I bring them to my group of recipe testers and they work through them as well. And then they come back with, either there was too much salt for me, or maybe I needed a little bit more, or, maybe something really handy for me, like saying, hey, it didn't work in my blender. My blender was too small or too big for the batch that you blended with. And so those little things are really helping refining, because I have like a small blender jar on my blend tech, and that's really handy for sauces and dressings. But if you're using a big blender jar, then that doesn't work very well. So that really helps to add those notes to the recipes for people who are, not so sure about the process or the elements. So yeah, I worked through that group. And then even when, like you say, it goes through editing, my editor was making some recipes too. So she didn't have any changes for me though. So that was good.
Yeah. How do you get people to be honest with you? I imagine there's some pressure for like, oh, Dreena, this was delicious.
Yeah. I think I tested enough that I feel like I always say to everybody, I don't expect you to like everything, because not everyone likes, any kind of dish or ingredient. Like you may not like eggplant, or you may not really enjoy, like I don't like sushi, so I'll never enjoy that kind of the seaweed in recipes very, to that degree. But I feel like my testers, there's been times that they've said, hey, this recipe, it just didn't work for me. And they're honest about it and fair. And I'm like, I want you to say that. Like, if you're having trouble with the recipe, tell me, because this is when to fix it, right? So usually they're very kind in their approach. Like, I tried it, this part didn't work, but the flavor was good, but this needs to be fixed. And then it helps me just refine it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you mentioned about like you prepare it like you're ready to blog it. How do you decide what goes on the blog, what you keep back at a cookbook, like just as a business decision, just so you can make a living?
Yeah, that's hard because I want to share everything, right?
Yeah.
Like I do. I want, when I'm even with the cookbook now, I'm like, I want to put this recipe on my blog. And there are some recipes I put on from the book, I put out there so that people can try them and sort of have sample recipes from the book. But, people have gotten very almost entitled out there too, right? They think that everything should be out there because that's the world we have now, where so much is online. They're like, do I actually have to buy the book to see this recipe? So there is some of that out there. It's I try to, with a book, offer, a well-rounded set of recipes. And so I even had an ebook with this. It was a promo ebook. You pre-order the book, you get the promo ebook. That was hard as well, just to select which recipes were going to go in the promo ebook and not in the book. I wanted to put everything in the book. I'm not good at that. I'm a Libra. It's hard for me to decide.
Yeah.
I go around with it for way too long.
But I imagine contractually, Ben Bella says, hey, don't give away everything because we need to make money here.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. But they're very also good with sharing a number of recipes, because they know that that's what, if people try one and they love it, that's usually going to encourage them to purchase the book. So, yeah.
So does, in terms of like, the book, it's some money, but it's just a limb. What else, what are the other limbs of your business that can support you doing this work for us?
Yeah, I'm still working on it. I'm still figuring that out to some degree, but I'm getting better at it. Like, for a long time, I didn't view myself as doing this as a, like you say, as a career. I felt it was more like a hobby, and I would do a lot of work for free. And then I realized I'm just doing, why am I doing this for free? Then offering like these posts for companies when other people aren't doing that. And that comes to be, an issue of like worthiness as well, which is something that I've had to work on over the years. Just that concept of being worthy of being paid to do that work. So that's part of it. Sometimes I do sponsored posts. I don't do a lot of them because I don't affiliate with a lot of brands. I have to really love a brand and company to affiliate. So I do have some affiliate brands that I work with. And if someone, for instance, buys a blender, I get a little kickback on that. Not a lot, but it builds over time. I do my ebooks as well. So that helps support my work. And if I ever run a promotion on the ebook, I get a little extra sales with that. And I have ads on my blog, which I would rather not have. And hopefully in time I can remove them. But right now I need them. It's part of the cost of running the blog and paying for my time to put recipes on there and answer questions and be social, right? And be out there for people to interact with.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you mentioned earlier about, you met Dr. Barnard at a Whole Foods, and Dr. Campbell wrote the cover blurb for the book. It's like, for me, meeting these people was like my heroes. Like, actually, I'm curious, like, how was it for you to not just to meet the blogosphere and the culinary people, but like at first you weren't that attuned to the vegan, the plant-based health world, and gradually you become more and more aligned with them. And you write in the introduction about reading the China study, I think probably 2010 or something like that, like 5 years after it came out. And like, how has meeting and becoming part of the health community influenced, first of all, like you and your family, but also your cookbooks and your cooking?
Yeah, I met, like, I think some of those people at that Summerfest, and it was the first time I realized that this was really a big deal. Like, these doctors are really, really respected and known in the field, Dr. Greger and Dr. Barnard. And I still haven't met Dr. Campbell. It's kind of on my bucket list, my big dream to meet him. And I haven't met John Robbins. I understand he was one of your sort of bucket list people, right? When you were starting your podcast, you really
I started the podcast. So I have that was for him.
Right, exactly. So that was, it was huge for me to have a forward from him, because that was such a pivotal book for me. And Dr. Campbell was kind of like, he's sort of like dear in my heart. I would love to meet him. I have like a lot of reverence for all the work they've done and continue to do, how much they are providing for the community. And it's definitely influenced my family too, because I'm creating food in line with the work that's being done. Do you know what I mean? Like moving from eating certain foods and ingredients and removing oil and keeping on a whole foods path for our family. Yeah.
Have you had to navigate the politics of that? Because I even at Vita Vegan Con, I suddenly I realized that there were a lot of vegan bloggers who are very sort of urban goth ethical vegans who felt like talking about health was just going to turn people off. And then the goal was to, if people are eating, vegan mac and cheese, hot hamburger, deep fried meals, that's better. And if you say, well, no oil or low oil, that people aren't going to like it as much. Did you find that you had to navigate that and kind of figure things out?
Yeah, I remember that. I actually remember returning from that. It's interesting you bring that up. It's sort of like a mind rush. I remember returning from that conference and writing a blog post. Am I healthy enough? Am I vegan enough? Because it felt like either if you were on the health path to being vegan, you weren't quite vegan enough. And if you were on the ethical side of vegan, you weren't seen as healthy enough. And it was kind of like, why can't we just be okay with, sort of accepting both sides, right? Like you can approach veganism from a health perspective. It doesn't mean that you don't care about the ethics at all. In fact, it usually means that you're learning about it along the way, and you can approach it from an ethical standpoint. And usually you're going to have to care about the health side of it, or it's not going to be sustainable for you, right? There's both aspects. I definitely did. I felt like I wasn't sure where I was for a while, because my books came out and vegan was always in the title. The Everyday Vegan, Vive la Vegan, Let Them Eat Vegan, Eat, Drink, and Be Vegan. And then my next book was Plant Powered Families, and now Kind Kitchen. And I kind of shifted away from, not that I don't use the term vegan, I do, but I feel like it has a huge weight for it for a lot of people. And they feel that they're afraid almost to step into eating plant-based because they feel like they have to fit this entire mold of eating of what vegan is to them. And that's not necessarily fair when, they might learn about it in a year and shift into it in another way. So I wanted to kind of broaden my work to be plant-based. I always say vegan as well, but just to show people that, you can step into this from a health perspective. It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Gotcha.
It's a big one though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's I've heard perfectly reasonable people get very upset at other people's recipes, saying like you're hurting the movement, and I hear it on both sides. Right. And it's easy to, like we talk about compassion a lot because it's a hard thing to display. Like, if it was easy, we wouldn't have to talk about it so much.
Yeah.
Right. But again, I feel like, the cookbook authors are at the vanguard. Sort of, the culinary leaders, people like you and Miyoko and Kathy Hester, who are really leading with kindness. You're not leading with veganism. You're not leading with health. You're leading with kindness, and veganism and health are both manifestations of that.
Absolutely. I really like that. Yeah, I really like that. That's absolutely it. It is manifestations of that. And if you can approach it in that way, you're going to help people achieve that in both areas. Yeah.
So one thing I realized as I was going through the cookbook is, at first glance, it like some of these recipes seemed more complicated than earlier ones. And I think that's possibly true. Like you're saying, like, hey, let's put a little more effort into this. But also I was like, oh, I can't make that because I don't have like 2 cups of cooked brown rice already. Like and it seems like you're putting a lot of stock in sort of preparation and batching and having ingredients. You talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. And that's the thing with these recipes is I open the book talking about prepping yourself in the kitchen. And I even take it from the step of starting at the grocery store. You have your produce and you come home. And the first thing I do when I come home with a big grocery shop, like lots of produce, is I get everything washed really quickly so it's ready to use for chopping or snacking. And my dish drainer is often filled with a lot of different produce because I just get everything into the sink, give it a quick wash, rinse in, and it's drained. I just, that sort of aspect of the hygiene with produce is important because it can carry a lot of contaminants on the surface, even, when you're cutting through a melon, for instance, right? It's cutting it into the flesh, and there's foodborne illness issues. So anyhow, I help people walk them through that process of like, okay, there's your produce. Now get started with having it ready in the fridge, and then also batch cooking key elements. Because for me, prep of food is so, you streamline things by having certain things batch cooked. And it's not a lot of things, but it's sort of like some key elements. Either you have beans ready or you have canned beans. You have potatoes and sweet potatoes pre-baked or pre-steamed and in the fridge, brown rice, quinoa, like a few key things. And then not only are they ready for recipes, but they're ready to just pull out for dinner bowls or to pair with a soup or, to throw into a stir fry. Like, it just makes your meal prep almost like without too much thought. It's like, what's in my fridge? Oh, I do have brown rice. I do have quinoa. I do have sweet potatoes. I can make this. So it does look a little peculiar. I know what you're saying when you flip the recipes and it's like, oh, there's a half cup of sweet potato in this recipe and a cup of potato in this recipe. Why? But it's that use of the batch cooked ingredients, but also I'm using those ingredients to provide texture, where if I'm removing oil, and also if I'm trying to make nut-free recipes, sometimes those elements are used for texture to, help with that recipe or flavor or color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a very efficient mode of operating. Like when I write an article, if I have to go from like nothing to finished article in a day, it's much harder than if I say, okay, today I'm going to spend 10 minutes brainstorming a topic. Tomorrow, I'm going to do a little research. The day after that, I'm going to write an outline. And the fourth day, I'm going to write it. Mm-hmm. Like, it takes a lot less time and mental energy than if I were to just do all those things in one step.
Yeah.
So just, having this stuff on hand. Like, I mean, I'll out myself. There are plenty of days I'll open the fridge and go, wow, look at all those condiments. I've got condiments and I've got uncooked produce.
Right.
That seems like a lot of work. Is there there's something frozen I can just heat up? And so it's a great discipline.
Yeah, and it just becomes like another part of your life. Like, it just becomes kind of like getting dressed in a way, or brushing your teeth. Like, these things that diet is very much a habit. Like, you get into habits with food. And so if you can batch prep a bunch of sweet potatoes every 5 or 6 days, or, depending on how much you eat them or how big your family is, but also, we have teenagers. And so for them making meals, they would be very much more at a loss as well if they couldn't reach in and grab those elements. So like my daughter Bridget, who's 16, she makes her lunches for school, and I always see her pulling out quinoa, cooked sweet potatoes, tofu that I've marinated and pre-baked, and it's in the fridge. So like, for them to eat healthy and not always reach for those processed things, it's having those things there for them too.
Wow, you just blew my mind with the idea that you can marinate and pre-bake tofu and not eat it right away.
You make a lot of it. That's the trick. It doesn't last long in this house either.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, so like we do ours like we got an air fryer. We do it in the air fryer. I'm wondering how how your cooking has shifted with all the appliances, Instant Pot, air fryer. I don't know what the latest and greatest is, but do you use those a lot or rely on them?
There are so many. I have a new one that I'm trying out soon. It's almost like a robot. I'm really like blown away by this one that I'm going to be seeing in a couple of weeks, which comes with like a little hub to almost work your way through the recipe. It's almost the thing is with me, when I'm developing recipes, I want to develop them for anybody and everybody, right? So not everyone has an air fryer, not everyone has an Instant Pot. I do have some Instant Pot recipes in the cookbook, but for some of them I also offer the stovetop method so that people can do either or. I use the Instant Pot fairly often, not all the time. I still am pretty like old school. I love the stove and the oven. I use them a lot, and I use my Breville smart oven. I use that a lot because it's so efficient at heating up and reheating food. I don't have a microwave. I reheat food in that a lot. And I do have the air fryer function, but I don't use it as much as just the good old oven component of it. Yeah, I'm a little old school with it, but I do use the Instant Pot, and I wouldn't be without like my food processor and blender. They're like my fourth and fifth children.
Yeah, I'd say we have the Breville smart oven too. I love the air fryer. It sounds like it's like an airplane on the tarmac getting ready to take off.
Right. What do you do in it a lot? What, veggies or for air frying?
Well, so like marinated tofu,
Mm-hmm.
and I find the trick is to preheat the rack so the tofu doesn't stick to it.
Right.
I'll also just take a bag of frozen cauliflower or broccoli and throw that in air fry. And like, after 8 minutes, it starts getting, the very, very little tips start to blacken, and then you pull it out and it's nice and crunchy.
Tasty. Yeah. Okay.
Those are and then I don't do I was doing a lot of like potato, like fries and things. Haven't done so much of that lately. But
I enjoy when you have potatoes already like steamed or cooked, and then you slice them and put them on the air fryer after that, like second, it's got that double cooking or double baking quality. I do enjoy potatoes that way on the air fryer. Yeah.
So we're coming to the close. So I want to make sure we get people excited about the cookbook so they can go get it first. So it's beautiful, and it's color coded, in that if you're looking at the spine, you can kind of see the different sections, because there's like a quarter inch of vertical color on the side of every right of both pages. So what are some of the recipes, maybe 3 or 4 that you're like really proud of and excited to share?
Oh, that's a biggie, but I love it. There's a nut-free cheesecake in the book, and I created that one very much for a tester of mine whose son has extreme allergies, and she cannot use nuts, and she certain seeds she also can't use. And I was like, I'm making this oil-free, nut-free cheesecake for you. I could have called it Sarah's cheesecake, but it's called Mythical Cheesecake because it's almost like a unicorn. It's like, how do you make a cheesecake without refined cream, vegan cream cheese, or without cashews? There is a little sweet potato in there, which seems to be the magical ingredient in most of my recipes. And I love that one. And I have a holiday section in this book, which is kind of fun because people have always asked, what do you serve at Christmas, or what do you serve at Thanksgiving? And I wanted to offer up really a fairly well-rounded menu with gravy and sides and a main and dessert options. I have a lot of oil-free dressings in the book. The Buddha dressing has been really popular already. People are loving that one. And I really love the curried carrot lentil soup. It's one of my favorites to make. It's really easy. The sweet potato lentil meatloaf, people are loving that one as well. And then I did a version of my home-style chocolate chip cookies that were in Viva La Vegan, and I wanted to make those oil-free, and I have those in the book. So that's kind of like a cool one for me too.
Let me look for those.
They're called honest chocolate chip cookies.
Okay, so apple crust, heavenly custard. The schmoopy cookies are back.
Schmoopy cookies are back. Yeah, they weren't in a book. They were just on my blog before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Honest chocolate chip cookies. Okay, so I see in the chocolate chip cookies you've got something called coconut cream and coconut butter. What are those? How are they different from like coconut oil or?
Yeah, that's a good question. And people, not everyone wants to make the recipes with the coconut products, which I totally understand, because if you are following a reversal diet, a disease reversal diet, coconut is very much out of your diet because it's just higher in fat. So coconut oil is the oil extracted from the coconut, kind of like I liken it to almonds and almond butter, or peanuts and peanut butter and peanut oil. So coconut and coconut butter is like making peanut butter from peanuts. You make coconut butter from coconut. It's the whole coconut that's pureed.
Okay.
So it's a whole foods product, but it is high in calories and fat for people who are watching that. And then coconut cream is when you use a can of coconut milk and the cream rises to the top. And so you take that from the coconut milk, from the coconut can to make the cookies. And you could really use milk, just regular plant milk in that recipe too. But the coconut butter is what offers that whole foods fat for the cookies. It's really tricky to make cookies without whole foods fat. You're making muffins if you make cookies without whole foods fat. They just turn out to be like muffins, which there's some really good muffins in the book too. I just made the Hope's blueberry muffins. I just made a double batch of those this morning because they're our daughters, our youngest, she's 12, and those are her favorite. I made some of those today.
Gotcha. So one more question, the no butter, no chicken. Is that just like butter chicken, or was that inspired by Bob Marley?
Oh no, yeah, it's like butter chicken. It's not inspired by Bob Marley.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I was after a veg event I did actually. One of the gals that was helping out with my demo there, and then became a friend and a recipe tester, told me she made this version of butter chicken. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to create a recipe. Like, you kind of inspired me, and that's the recipe I created. And that one's been really popular too. It's really flavorful. And I don't use, like a faux meat. I use chickpeas because I can, and they're great.
Awesome. Looks great. It's on the list.
Good.
So people want to follow you on the internet and social. Where do they go?
Yeah, well, you can go to my site, and then all of my handles are there. You can link through to, Instagram or Facebook, but my site is dreenaburton.com, Dreena Burton.com. And then they can find all of my YouTube. I'm on all of that stuff like everyone else, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, on
Gotcha.
there.
So is your kitchen full of like lights and?
No, I just present it as who I am. This is my kitchen. I do my YouTube. I did one yesterday. I've been doing them every Sunday. I've been trying to get into the routine of scheduling a YouTube time. I call it tea time with Dreena. And I have been doing it the last few Sundays at like 1 p.m. Pacific time on Sundays. And I just go to my kitchen as it is. And I'm not very professional with lights and stuff. I just show up.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So do you consider yourself a teacher now?
In a way, it's interesting because I had someone say that to me, that, you're a teacher. And I'm like, what? But in a way, because when I'm on those videos and people are asking questions, I feel like, wow, these things that seem kind of obvious to me in a way, like seem just like people know them. They don't, but you accept that for yourself. When you've been doing something for a while, you sort of start to understand it in a way that you think other people get it too. Do you know what I mean? So when I realized when I'm doing a recipe and showing a shortcut, that's a really big revelation for some people. So in a way, I guess, yeah.
So has that changed how you write at all? Kind of.
My recipes have always had like notes in them. And that's one thing that people have remarked about sort of, I think, my recipes from the beginning, that like, oh, look, she adds all these like extra notes on the sidebars, which my, publishers have always loved how much, how much text I try to shove into one recipe. They're like, oh my gosh, we need white space. But, but I like to almost feel like I'm there offering suggestions or a little extra clarity on things in the recipes. So I add notes wherever I can in recipes. And that's been something I've done right from book one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. I have one more question. I was kind of debating whether to ask just from a sort of emotional safety perspective, but I know you wrote about in the introduction about some really hard life situations when you were young, some tragedies, and then also about dieting and being overweight. And like you've been at this for 20 years now, and on the cover there's this beautiful picture of you in a sleeveless dress.
Mm.
Like, I'm curious about like you and your and sort of body image as a
Mhm.
representative. Like, do you think
Mhm.
about that? And you're 20 years older than when you had
Yeah,
your first cookbook. Like, I'm just
totally.
curious, like how if that runs through your mind.
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, when I was doing the photos for that book, I felt very self-conscious in many ways. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm 50. I'm in this arena with a lot of people now who are like 20 and 30. Like it feels like a big deal to, represent this healthy image, right, of being vegan. But at the same time, um, I feel like I'm at a healthier place than I was many years ago as well. And like you said, it was a long, sort of hard journey. And in my early years, I did not have like an easy childhood, and a lot of trauma there with family deaths and dieting and all of that. And that was the culture then too, right? We dieted. That was what we did in those days, and my mother did. So definitely, and I went through a time with being online. Like I remember first being online, and I would get a lot of comments, or not, maybe not a lot, but enough that it stuck in my head, right? A lot may be three or two, but they feel like a lot when it's something very negative. People saying, oh, look, yay, another skinny vegan, or she looks like she's from an Auschwitz camp or something, or
Mm.
oh yay, another flat-chested vegan, like things like that that really impact your psyche. Like, wow, um, that eating vegan, there's that whole notion of, well, you have to look a certain way. Well, you don't. But if you're eating healthy, you're probably going to be leaner. But my body type is very long and lanky. Like that is my body type too, right? If I were to put on 20 pounds, I would still have very long arms
Yeah.
and very small wrists. That's kind of my body shape. So I've had to, accept that about myself. But that was hard early on. And I had those comments really were like big bruises to me, because especially when you've already been fairly sensitized to body image, and
Mm.
then you think you look good and you feel good, and people are then shaming you in the opposite direction, saying you're too skinny. It's
Mm.
not easy. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also imagining, so, we have a culture in which like the ideal age is probably like
Yeah.
18,
Yeah.
right? And all of us are getting older. And of course, there's a way in which we still have all that stuff inside us, and we can
Hmm.
look and say, well, I wish I looked like I looked 40 years
Hmm.
ago, 35 years ago. But
Hmm.
also there's this sense like I know Miyoko just turned 60, and she
Mm.
had some pictures, and like, damn, something's working. like
Right.
like there's something to be said for like, who am I going to trust about how to live a healthy life and look good? A 24-year-old who could live on like,
Yeah.
espresso and Kit Kats and pizza and Coke,
Right. Right.
or you've at 50 you've kind of earned it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, good point. I mean, I remember when my husband's parents were reading the Dean Ornish book, and he talks about in that book how you can pretty much do anything to your body in before you're 20, and your body's resilient, right? You can eat whatever you want, and not a whole lot shows up. But when you get past your 30s and into your 40s, that this is obviously when things your body does not accept those damages really anymore. So yeah, I mean, you're kind of showing what the lifestyle is. I mean, like I'll be 51 next week,
Oh,
and
happy birthday.
thank you. And yeah, so it's like you're helping people see that 51 doesn't have to be, or 60 doesn't have to be, like with Miyoko, the image that you thought it was when you were 20, right? When you would see people and feel like, oh no, they're aging and they're not healthy, or they're not active, or their bodies are, breaking down. It doesn't have to be that image anymore. It doesn't have to be that way.
Right. I think also, for me, some of the vanity has softened a little bit, and that like, okay, if I'm healthy, like healthy is beautiful at our age and older,
Yeah.
as opposed to like, do I have the perfect jawline? And
Right.
I don't know if you know about this, but about me, but I'm bald.
Really?
Like, and it's semi by choice. Like I do shave, but if I didn't, it would be like the world's most obvious comb over, or just like coming to terms with that being okay.
Yeah.
And really, like I think it's complicated, especially like my physical appearance isn't part of my brand.
Right.
It
is for a lot of
in
people.
the same way it is for cookbook authors and other personalities. And I think, you do it strategically to some degree.
Yeah. And for women, there's more pressure, right? Women generally have much more pressure for that appearance than men. And it can carry a lot of weight for sure. But, you mentioned, even for you, like you glow, right? You can see that your skin and your eyes are glowing, and that comes through, right? That just comes through with how you eat. So even as we age, the gray hairs come in, you get some wrinkles, things like that, but you still have a glow. And that comes through. I feel like I see that in people very much as they're aging, the difference.
Yeah, it's funny we talk about the difference between like men and women. It's like when I am podcasting with a man and he wants to know if we're doing a video too, it's because he wants to know if he should put on a shirt.
Yeah.
And for a woman, it's like, do I have to spend an hour,
right,
in front of the mirror?
Right. Put on a little lipstick, some blush. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. There's, it's not easy, because especially in the health, in this arena of health and wellness, that is part of it, right? People want to see, like they want to see, well, what do you look like if you're eating this way? And there's a lot associated to weight loss as well. But for me, this time of life as well is different for women. This is the stage of menopause for women. And generally that means, women tend to put on a bit of weight this time of life. So this is something different for me to navigate as well. It's like, well, my body's shifting this time of life, but I actually feel healthier now than I did, say, 20 years ago, when I was much harder on myself and I was having babies and trying to resume like my normal weight and just kind of pushing my body a lot. So that's a whole other scope of discussion, I know, but it's definitely I'm glad you brought it up, because it's definitely present in our arena, I think, when we're talking about wellness and health.
So I have an idea for you. You should write the vegan menopause cookbook, which involves spending a lot of time in front of an open fridge.
Yeah.
And no cooking.
Only using the Instant Pot, so you don't have to heat up your kitchen with the stove and oven. Yeah.
All right. I expect acknowledgement when that comes out.
Okay, will do.
So Dreena, it's been such a pleasure reconnecting with you. Thank you so much for doing this amazing cookbook and for taking the time today.
Oh, no, my gosh. Thank you. Really fun discussion. And, I'm glad you started the podcast years ago to interview John Robbins. And you've interviewed so many people along the way. Thank you.
I know. Yeah, it's certainly a runaway train at this point.
Yeah.
So I should get John back on, see what he's up to.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, thanks again. Be well, and I hope our paths cross again soon.
I'm sure they will. Thank you very much, Howie. Take care.
Bye.